Welcome to our webinar on understanding and adapting to PPWR with practical cases. And for those who are not so familiar with PPWR, it stands for Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. My name is Gosia Olenska, and I'm super excited today to lead this webinar for you. This is a critical and timely topic. And as we all know, the packaging industry is undergoing a significant changes, which are driven by this new EU piece of law, which actually is aiming at reducing waste and promoting sustainability. This changes, as any new legislation, present both challenges and opportunities for businesses, consumers, but also policymakers. So today we have the pleasure of diving into some selected provisions of PPWR because it's a very long piece of legislation. So we would need a lot of time to go through the whole text. But we will be exploring also with you practical solutions. So to make it a little bit more a real life description. So before we dive into the core content of today's webinar, please take a moment to review our disclaimer. We are very excited to have you with us today, but please keep in mind that this presentation is for general information purpose only, should not be taken as a legal advice. It is based on the presenter's knowledge, and no guarantees are made regarding its accuracy. And we disclaim any liability for actions which might be taken or not taken based on this presentation. So with this in mind, what are we going to do today? As already hinted, in today's session, we will be exploring the key developments and requirements because regulation does put requirements on packaging manufacturers and users. We will be using two practical case studies that the team has developed. And through these case studies, we will discuss selected requirements and solutions companies can consider to stay ahead of the PPWR curve. So get ready to explore the practical impacts of packaging and packaging waste regulation. And we do hope that the real life examples can help you in further understanding of the requirements which are changing in Europe. Okay. Of course, I'm not here alone. So before we move on, let me introduce my colleagues who will be your hosts today. And as you can see on the slide, we are many. We have with us our regulatory team, which is focused on PPWR and standards. That is Maria and Joachim, as well as two colleagues from marketing team who in their daily roles focus on primary and industrial packaging, so Delphine and Olivier, and they're both acting as market development managers. I have a pleasure today to join you in a dual role as a moderator of this event and as a market development manager for advanced recycling for EMEAF. So warm welcome to you. And just to give you a little bit a hint on how are we going to proceed in today's session, the agenda is quite simple. 4 points. Most probably you like the fourth one as well. We will start with PPWR in 60 seconds, where Maria will try to break a world's record in summarizing this thick book in 1 minute. Then Olivier and Delphine will take us through primary packaging and industrial packaging examples. And in the end, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions. And based on the previous sessions we have, there are many interesting questions coming our direction. So one more time, thank you for joining. And let's dive into the future of packaging and explore on how we can collectively contribute to PPWR success. Masha, floor is yours.
Thank you, Gosha. So the PPWR is not just a regulation. It is setting a significant stage for transformation in packaging landscape. It will change how we design, how we consume, and also dispose of the packaging in European Union. So what makes PPWR so special? At the heart of PPWR, there are 3 principles of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And these principles, they guide the regulation's key objectives. So PPWR aims to prevent the generation of packaging waste, and this means introducing restrictions on what packaging can be used today, and also promoting reusable and refillable packaging solutions. Regulation focuses on boosting high-quality recycling, and the goal is to make all packaging on the European market recyclable by 2030. Furthermore, a regulation also emphasizes the concept of bringing waste to value. PPWR introduces several new requirements, including sustainability requirements like recyclability, reusability, packaging minimization, and specific substance restriction. PPWR also sets harmonized rules in European Union and making extended producer responsibility schemes, EPRs, mandatory across all European member states. Another requirements under PPWR, which falls under harmonization, is requirements for marking and labeling. So now, once we know about the general concept, let's have a look at PPWR compliance timeline. PPWR has entered into force earlier this year in February, and this marked the beginning of transformative journey for packaging in the European industry. So the general application date of PPWR is August 2026, and from this date, businesses must comply with the requirements set by this regulation. By 2030, there are several key requirements that will come into effect, and packaging must be designed to minimize the weight and volume and avoid unnecessary materials. A significant portion of packaging will have to be designed for reuse, and all packaging must be recyclable. This includes the new requirement, which is specific design criteria to ensure recyclability. Also, plastic packaging must include a minimum percentage of recycled content. Following this, by 2035, packaging must be recycled at scale. And this means that packaging in the European Union that should be collected, sorted, and recycled in the large quantities within the Union. Also, this regulation set a deadline to phase out certain grades based on recyclability performance assessment. This way, the grade D packaging will be phased out by 2030, and grade C packaging will be phased out by 2038. When we look ahead to 2040, these targets will increase, especially related to reuse targets and recycled content targets. It is important to note that secondary legislation is still under development, and many details and specific requirements will be clarified through this secondary legislation in different forms like delegated and implementing acts, and it will provide the further guidance on how to achieve the targets set by PPWR. So now, once we know the general concept and compliance timeline for PPWR, let's look at some real-life examples, starting with the primary packaging. Oliver, to you.
Thank you, Maria. So in this part of the presentation, we will illustrate the impact we believe the PPWR will have using a primary packaging example. And the example we've chosen is an 82 micron freezer film. On the left of the slide, you see the graphic. It is a 3-ply BOPP BOPET PE sealant film laminate. And on the right, you see the PPWR clauses which we believe will have the greatest impact. And so Article 5, substances of concern, 6, recyclable packaging, 7, recycled content, 10, packaging minimization, and 45, eco-modulated EPR. And on the next pages, we will go into detail into each of those articles and sections. But before we do, just one important note. My colleague Maria already explained a minute ago that there's quite a lot of secondary legislation that still needs to be developed. And basically what this means is we know the framework, we know the direction, but we don't know for sure the exact impact until all of this secondary legislation is defined. And so what we'll give you on the next pages is basically our view on the most likely scenario. And the way we've chosen to run through this is not in order that the articles are numbered, but to really run through in an order that makes sense from a packaging design perspective. That's why we start with packaging minimization. And we start with what we believe is probably the most underestimated clause in the PPWR. And why do we say that? We say that because it usually isn't talked about much, but we believe this will have a significant impact because we believe that there's still a lot of room for optimization of the packaging. And why do we say that there's still a lot of room for optimization? Basically, two reasons. And so, first, whenever we do reverse engineering on a specific packaging type, the results that we get is a wide range of packaging thicknesses. And so specifics in pack content can explain a bit of this variation, but we believe the ranges we are seeing are simply too big and some packs are simply over-designed. The second reason is, and we've seen in the marketplace a lot of specifications, and they were mostly built on historical references. And so the true limit of the system, so the film property that is really limiting to go even thinner in gauge, has never been looked at. Now, of course, we don't want to generalize. We know and we are sure that a good portion of the market is already optimized, but still we believe that there's quite still some room for improvement left in a good number of cases. Okay, so what does that actually mean for the packaging minimization clause? Let's take a look at what it says. And we've tried to make a summary. Yeah? So the first point, by 2030, the packaging should be designed to use the minimum possible weight and volume without compromising functionality. Now, then the next question is, okay, how do we define the minimum amount? And that is the second point that you see on the page. And that's that by 2027, the CEN will prepare standards that specify for the most common packaging types, wall thicknesses, and empty space. So going back to our freezer film example, what would this practically mean? So the packaging standards, they will need to be developed. They need to be developed and they will need to be based on data. And so a good starting point would be a data set of reverse engineering of samples that exist on the market today. And so ExxonMobil has done the reverse engineering of more than 70 market samples, and we show the results in the graph. And the graph on the left is basically a histogram with laminated sample thicknesses. The graph on the right is also a histogram, and it contains the non-laminated sample thicknesses. And so what we can observe with both graphs is that there's a wide variation in the thickness range, going all the way from less than 40 micron to more than 80 micron. And so if we look at our example, the 82 micron laminated freezer film, it really falls on the right side of the spectrum. So a preliminary conclusion is that this packaging would be over-designed. It would be over-designed because the thickness is way bigger than the average, and also it is laminated. And we see that for freezer film, not necessarily do you need to do the lamination step for functionality purposes. It is mostly done for aesthetics. So let's take a look at the next slide, because when we say, okay, preliminary conclusion, the packaging may be over-designed, how do we prove that? And that is by testing the limit of the system. And so the PPWR in that respect is quite well written. It also requires this. And so Annex 4 of Article 10 basically asks that to document the design requirements that prevent further reduction of weight or volume of the package. And so if we look at what that practically means for our freezer film example, and that's the animation that you see on the left side, is that in this example, we pack frozen spinach and frozen green beans, and they are basically filled and sealed into packs in a typical VFFS machine. Then all of these packs end up in a box. The packs are compressed and the box is folded and closed. And so if we follow this process through, and if you want to find the limiting property, we would send films of various thicknesses through this process and see how they perform. And basically what we can see, if we send films through this process that are too thin, we see that the films are punctured and then teared. As a result of that, we can also determine at what thickness the films are punctured and teared. So we can establish the limiting property, and we can establish the minimum required thickness to still pass and succeed this process and the films passing without being punctured and teared. So now that we have a good idea of the limiting factor and the minimum required thickness, which in our case, in our example, would be 60 micron, we will also need to redesign the packaging to be recyclable. And before we actually go through that example, my colleague Joachim is going to explain a bit first the concept of how PPWR looks at recyclability.
Thank you, Olivier. So in contrast to packaging minimization, the recyclability of packaging has been in the spotlight of what compliance with PPWR will require. Packaging needs to be designed to be recyclable as of 2030, and that with a recyclability grade of A, B, or C. And as of 2038, it gets even stricter. Only recyclability grades A and B will be allowed on the EU market. So how do we get to these recyclability grades that are so important? It is expected that the recyclability grade is obtained in 2 steps. In the first steps, there is a translation of design for recycling guidelines into a recyclability score. The EU Commission has repeatedly expressed their intention to consider, in their upcoming delegated act, the design guidelines that are developed by the European Committee for Standardization, CEN. However, design for recycling guidelines are typically long tables and not just single numbers. Therefore, we need this translation into a single number. For this translation, we can already have a look at design for recycling schemes that exist, like from Recyclas or from CFLEX that have proposed methodologies how to go from the complex design for recycling guidelines to a single score. In the upcoming delegated act, the EU Commission will propose their own methodology, which of course may consider existing methodologies and which may also further consider another one that the European Standardization Organization, CEN, intends to work out on top of the existing ones. In the second step, the recyclability score then will be modulated according to rules that will be set in the delegated act. So far, we know that it is likely that here will be substances of concern and potentially some other criteria that are taken into account. Once we have the recyclability grade, then it is expected to be used for eco-modulation of EPR fees. Today, we don't know how big these EPR fees will be. This amount still needs to be set by the policymaker. However, we can already see today that there are some EPR schemes that have fees at the same order of magnitude as raw material cost. So it is not far-fetched to assume that future EPR fees will be at a similar level. This is the concept for the recyclability of packaging. Now let's have a look at what the recyclability requirement means for our freezer-film example. Back to you, Olivier.
Thanks, Joachim. So before we do that, we would like to provide some market data perspective from the reverse engineering that we've done. And so those are the 2 charts that you see on the left of the slide. And so on the top chart, you can see that about 40% of the packages are laminated non-recyclable. The bottom chart basically illustrates that in those packs, polypropylene and polyester is the most used types of substrate that make the packaging non-recyclable. Okay, then on the right side, we have our example, the multi-material film. And it's no surprise due to the fact that the film contains polyester and polypropylene in combination with the polyethylene sealant film. This package is deemed not recyclable, both from a Recyclas and from a CEN perspective. So that packaging will need to change. That packaging will need to change into a recyclable variant. And so further building on the 60 micron film we had identified in the packaging minimization section, the film will be surface printed with an OPV, so an overprint varnish applied to provide ink protection and premium look. And so now that we have this finished film, we can pass this through the Recyclas guidelines. And if we do that, we end up with a recyclable film with score or grade C. And that is, we drop one class because we assume that the film has more than 50% of the surface printed. So if we put this 60 micron film against the CEN guidelines, we end up with a likely green category. And as my colleague Joachim explained a minute ago, going from this green into the final recyclability grade that the PPWR will take into account, that is not defined yet. That's still uncertain. So now that this packaging is made recyclable, and in the previous step, we've minimized its weight, at the next article, we will talk about the substances of concern. So with regards to the substances of concern, there's basically two main impacts. On the left side, I will take you through shortly what that means in terms of PFAS. And on the right side, my colleague Maria will take us through the substances of concern, the other substances of concern. So for PFAS specifically, in some polyethylene products, we know is polymeric PFAS is used as a polymer processing aid. And the requirement on that is quite simple. As of August 2026, food packaging cannot contain more than 50 ppm of polymeric PFAS. So as a result of that, we do expect the market to ask for PPA alternative solutions for food packaging. So over to you, Maria, on the other substances of concern.
Thank you, Olivier. PPWR mandates the minimization of substances of concern in packaging material. So what it means, manufacturers must reduce the presence and concentration of hazardous substances to ensure safer and more environmentally friendly packaging. ECHA, European Chemical Agency, has been tasked by European Commission to identify harmful substances in packaging and assess their impact on reuse, recycle, and safety of the materials. So this study, it is due in December 2026, will provide a crucial insights on how these substances affect the sustainability of packaging materials. Based on the ECHA findings, European Commission may propose restrictions similar, let's say, to PFAS on other substances in packaging. And these measures are part of the broader effort to make packaging more sustainable. And now we will see after 2026 what kind of substances will be included, let's say, in the further restrictions. So now, once we looked at the examples on how we minimized packaging weight, we talked about recyclability of the packaging. Let's have a look on the topic of the recycled content in the packaging. Gosha, over to you.
Thank you, Maria. Article 7, the famous Article 7 of PPWR. Actually, through this article, the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation is mandating the use of post-consumer recycled content in plastic packaging. This requirement has been put there in order to boost recycling and reduce packaging waste in Europe. When I think about the Article 7 and when you look at Article 7, there are two elements which are related to it that you should keep in mind. The first one is on the right-hand side, and that's the targets and the timelines. So you can see that there are the timelines in 2030 and 2040 when this requirement will come into force. And the materials have been split into contact sensitive and non-contact sensitive applications. If we look at the one in the red box, the contact sensitive packaging in 2030 will have to contain minimum 10% of mandatory recycled content, which then will go to 25% by 2040. So that's one part of the Article 7 to keep in mind. The second one is on how the mandatory recycled content will be applied and enforced. The text today talks about plastic part of packaging, so the content will be applied to any part in your packaging which is made of plastic more than 5%. The content needs to come recovered from post-consumer plastic waste. and it will be applied per packaging types and formats, which you can find in Annex 2, Table 1 of the regulation itself. Also, important thing to keep in mind, the targets will be looked at as average per manufacturing plant per year. And by the end of 2026, we are expecting to have an implementing act which will establish the methodology for calculation and verification of the percentage of recycled content. PPWR puts self-assessment into the picture, so companies will have to have documentation in place in order to show to the authorities when asked that they comply with that requirements. One thing also to keep in mind is that the PPWR circularity ambition will require both advanced and mechanical recycling. Those two technologies will probably contribute in a different way depending on the target and an application. But the targets are ambitious, and PPWR will require different technical solutions. So as said, the targets will come into force in 2030. But let's have a look how the sustainability requirements may tie back to extended producer responsibility, which is in place in some of member states already today. And Joachim will give you a practical example on how mandatory recycled content targets are looked through the lens of EPRs in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Gosha. Earlier in this presentation, we highlighted how the recyclability grade is expected to be obtained. On the present slide, we now give you an example how it could be used. Could, because today we don't know the details of the eco-modulation. Therefore, we are using the Dutch EPR system Verpakt as an example, since it has a pronounced eco-modulation, which is also what we expect for the upcoming delegated act. For our freezer film, we're considering a bag size of 25 on 25 centimeters. Starting now on the left side, you see the multi-material structure. For a thickness of 82 micrometer, the EPR fee amounts to €6.70 per 1,000 bags, as we need to apply the base fee of €1.32 per kilogram. Since Verpakt has an eco-modulation that works with discounts rather than penalties, in this case, the base fee also sets the final EPR fee. Moving over now to the right side. We start with a much thinner bag of only 62 micrometer. This reduced thickness already results in a reduced EPR fee of only €4.84 per 1,000 bags. And this is again obtained by applying the base fee of €1.32 per kilogram. Now we need to apply the eco-modulation. In the present case, we get to apply 3 discounts. First one for monomaterial content, second one called proper labeling, and the third one called compliance with KIDV recycle check, which are Dutch recycle guidelines. Each of these discounts is good for 10 cents per kilogram reduction of EPR fee. So it sums up to a combined discount of 30 cents per kilogram or €1.11 per 1,000 bags. After that, we can then apply another eco-modulation through the incorporation of 10 weight% contact-sensitive post-consumer recycled material. For the incorporation of these 10 weight% PCR material, there is another discount of 20 cents per kilogram, which equals to 73 cents per 1,000 bags. Altogether, the EPR fee that you see on the right-hand side structure is less than half of what we have for the multi-material structure on the left side. So what should you take away from this slide? Well, eco-modulation of EPR fees can be substantial, and it needs to be considered from the beginning at the design stage if you want to minimize the total cost of ownership. With that, we have concluded our example in the primary packaging space. So now let's have a look at what PPWR can mean for industrial packaging. Over to you, Delphine.
Thank you, Joachim. Hello, everyone. Industrial packaging, we are focusing here mostly on commercial and industrial packaging with specific flexible packaging in mind. These are industrial packaging like wrapping films or hooding films used in palletization. as well as heavy or medium duty bags and some compression pack as well used in industrial specific end uses. So here, coming back to the Article 7 on mandated recycled content and non-contact sensitive applications, this is actually a level of 35% per year per manufacturing plant and category of packaging. We would like here to share some successful cases where converters, together with equipment machine manufacturers, were able to incorporate some PCR rightly selected with premium quality PCRs directly with virgin signature polymers directly feeding in the hopper at the converters. And these virgin signature polymers can be also specifically selected and acting as boosting effects in the films. So there are some examples such as collation shrink, stretch wrap film, heavy duty sacks, and compression pack in hygiene field in this case. The next slide now goes into more detail with some illustrative cases. Okay, here I'd like to cover some specific cases which are available, by the way, on our website. There are more available, but really looking at multiple proven cases where collaboration took place between, again, machine manufacturers, OEMs, and converters, and bringing some successful cases with PCR incorporation into industrial films, and where there were actually no compromise on the specific end use functionality and no significant difference versus some virgin situations for formulations. So here, in these given examples, we have on the left a hand wrap stretch film with 35% PCR, a collaboration here giving some high tenacity films, still with the 35% PCR incorporation in the film. In the center is a heavy duty bags with 50% PCR, even here exceeding the 35%, where there is no compromise at all on tear resistance, as you can see here, and dark impact force. The reference is the gray bar, and the PCR film is actually the dark purple one. And on the right is also recent cases where we have been also successful at developing at some converters, some stretch hood films with 35% PCR, mostly in the core of the film. This is where we recommend, and providing some similar functionality versus a virgin film and keeping the same thickness. And we can see here some specific signature polymer grades rightly selected in combination with the PCR in the core layer together with Vistamax as a polymer modifier can deliver some very strong resistance to tear propagation, improve snappiness, force, and toughness to the film. All right, so then, and keeping on the industrial packaging topic, there is a watch out and a hot topic for this year of 2025, but started already last year at the time of the negotiation of between the trilogue in the development of the final PPWR text. There have been some expansion of the reuse quotas for certain industrial and commercial packaging. And here specifically wrapping films and straps. And these were recognized as very challenging. And talking about palletization films, today in the text, this means 40% reuse target across Europe, all cross-border trade movements, and 100% between companies within the same country or within same affiliate of each of the company in the 27 countries of the EU. So the Commission has recognized that the challenging point of these quotas, and they can actually adopt a EU-wide exemption, which is somehow a delegated act for wrapping films and straps, and linked to this Article 27, where this is listed. And for that purpose, they have requested Deloitte Consultant Group to lead this assessment, so more the impact assessment, reviewing the environmental impact, the safety to the European citizen and consumers, as well as the economic impact to the industry in Europe. So looking at some preliminary studies results which are available, the trade association actually supports these exemptions, and there have been some studies commissioned by the European Plastic Converters, and I think I'm allowed to give you some preview here, which have been shared already with Deloitte consultant. The preliminary summary revealed that indeed the comparative life cycle assessment of various single-use plastic wrap and versus reused transport packaging, which are actually revealing that the single-use plastic transport packaging has a lower environmental impact than any rigid reused transport packaging in all application fields and most of the conditions versus flexible reuse transport, thinking about some kind of hood that you can use on top. Additionally here, the economic impact assessment also, it's a modeling approach which has revealed as well that for the long-term cost of switching is actually representing a major impact to the industry with some level as high as 3 billion euros per year, looking at a 15-year transition film to move potentially to these reusable system. And this is only assessing at this stage 8 different sectors of the industry. So also the question about how to measure the quotas for reuse. At this stage, the calculation method is still unknown, but is to be developed in a delegated act by 2027. And we understand based on communication from the Commission that the leading option is actually to report the details on a yearly basis and at the packaging unit level. So reporting the pallet, the strapping or the wrapping films, and the carton boxes, all that, and reporting which one are reusable and getting to the right target. So I think this is all for my topic, and I will be pleased to give the floor back to Gosia.
Thank you, Delphine, and thank you, Maria, Joachim, and Olivier, for taking us through these practical examples that can be applied to PPWR requirements. To the participants, so to our customers and partners and webinar guests, our message is quite simple. The time to act is now. We know that many provisions of this new packaging regulation will require further definitions and alignments. There will be a secondary legislation coming our way. There will be guidelines documents prepared by the Commission. But already today, there are several critical elements that we know and we can address. I will start with the volume and weight minimization. Today, we can achieve this requirement through downgauging. We've showed you an example, which can actually drive the reduced material usage and potentially environmental impact. Recyclability, we can ensure recyclability already today. It is crucial. All the packaging in the future will have to be recyclable. You can benefit from lower extended producer responsibility fees in countries where today the systems exist and allow for it. I have taken you through the the requirement of incorporation of PCR. You can prepare yourself for this requirement already today. You might be aware that we do offer circular certified polymers on the market globally. And there was the last point, which was mentioned by Maria about the limitations of PFAS content in food packaging. The target is in August next year. However, we know that changes take time. With this being said, today you can align your strategies against these elements and future requirements. it will actually ease the compliance, and you will be able to capitalize on the opportunities that they present. When the regulation in Europe is drafted, there is a lot of guidelines, and when the guidelines and secondary legislation is being prepared, the European Commission consults the stakeholders and asks about the experiences and the needs. So if you apply those today, you will be also better positioned through your trades or yourself to actually participate in stakeholders consultation. We know that when this text has been prepared and discussed for many months, the stakeholders' voice was taken into account, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully, but everybody has a right to be heard. And if you have actually a practical experience to add on top, you are bringing a positive element to the story. So as you can see on my slide, you can get ready today to be successful in the future. So I hope we have given you a hope that the solutions do exist, and then don't be shy to reach out to us.